Everyone, I am Pierre Ferrari, CEO of Heifer International, and I am delighted to be able to welcome Nick Kristof, a Pulitzer Prize winner as a journalist at the New York Times. And Nick, I hope you're well in these kind of difficult times.
I'm well and healthy, and I hope everybody else is staying healthy too.
So far we are, isolation and masks and everything else, we're doing it all. So it's good down here in Georgia. The question that I would like to start off with is, as you know, the World Food Prize has come out, and you wrote about it, I think, a couple of weeks ago, about one of the effects of the pandemic, which will be hunger and possibly famine and everything else. And I would love to hear a little bit about your point of view on that and what could we do. We at Heifer are very boots on the ground kind of people. And what could we do? I would love to hear your points of view on that, and I think our audience would like to as well.
Sure, and I'd welcome. And you've obviously thought about this a lot yourself, Pierre. So my take is that we've, I think, been very focused in talking about the impact of COVID on the developing world, on the medical effects. So we've looked at how many ventilators there are, at the impact of the virus itself, and so far that impact has been actually fairly modest. Just in the last week or so, the cases in some African countries have been increasing, but from a very low base. But, there is some reason to think that perhaps the direct medical consequences may not be as devastating as some have feared, partly because of the demography of the population. 2% of Nigeria's population is over 65 compared to 23% of Italy's.
Yeah.
But while the direct medical effects, there maybe won't be as devastating as some have hoped as some have feared in the developing world, I think there's great reason to fear that the secondary effects of hunger, illiteracy will be enormous. And the pandemic of hunger we're already seeing as economies close down, as people lose access to markets, to transportation. And that's what I think what I fear the most. And I guess what I would love to see is a great emphasis globally on addressing that hunger pandemic. We're not going to do much about the shortage of ventilators in Central African Republic. We know how to address hunger, and especially regarding children. If we miss the boat in feeding children in 2020, then for decades to come, these countries and the people themselves paying the price.
Yeah, malnutrition and cognitive impact are severe and very quick. Unfortunately, I think that's what you're really mentioning.
Exactly.
We're working really hard at making sure that, or at least we've begun to work hard at making sure that the transportation, literally getting the food from the field to the markets, or even directly to consumers or to households or communities, is what we're working on to try and alleviate that, at least within the communities we work with.
And what are you seeing in the communities you work with around the world in terms of ability?
They're kind of a little surprised that everything is shut down around them, because most of the communities we work with are quite far away from the centers. But the market still exists. People are still hungry. People still want to buy food. So they're organizing themselves to actually transport food themselves, as opposed to dependent on infrastructure that existed before that's shut down. In Ecuador, for example, in Quito, our farmers are delivering food directly to households. They're sort of like the local Amazon.com, if they figured out, they've got apps, they've got the whole thing, and they're delivering with bicycles. And it's not huge. It's about 1,000, and I think their ambition is to have 3,000 families serviced. Same with milk in East Africa. They're figuring it out themselves. To continue earning revenue, which they need to buy whatever else they need to buy, medicine, education, etc. They are figuring out how to deliver their goods to market. But that's. Is that a global effort, national effort? No, but it's at least at a local level, people are being very imaginative.
As you may know, there's sort of a similar effort in the U.S. that the meatpacking industry, for example, is very centralized and
Yeah.
an enormous risk. So there is talk among American farmers about trying to supply, a steer or a
Yeah.
milk to local families. But
Yeah.
there are a lot of regulatory reasons why in the U.S. that is
It's not so,
difficult.
I don't know if you know this, but we have a ranch in Arkansas, Heifer Ranch, and we've got a linkages to e-commerce, which we deliver livestock. I mean, we deliver food, meat, beef, pork, lamb, and chickens. And that business that we have is called Grassroots Co-op, is gone through the roof. The business, for exactly the reasons you've identified. And most of that, we grow most of the food ourselves, but at the same time, we're now bringing in lots of small farmers whose market was restaurants, et cetera, which has all been, of course, stopped. So on a very small scale, very small scale indeed, but nonetheless, the business, the e-commerce business has just gone through the roof, absolutely through the roof. I mean, like
Well,
six,
yeah.
7 times.
I wonder if that, may be a model for more farmers around the U.S. over the next few years.
Yeah. And I think, the quality of the food is very high. I mean, of course, I'm completely biased here. I'm selling. But the pork, the chicken is absolutely delicious and quite different from the industrial products. So hopefully we'll retain a few customers for the longer term and make, create an alternative route to market, which I think is what's going to come out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In the developing world, are you seeing, that farmers, for example, that they, because of difficulties in transportation, because of the social distancing, that they can't get seeds, for example, or they can't get fertilizer or
Right.
this kind of thing?
Yeah, infrastructure is the key, right? If you want to create some independent farm system that is not exploitive or predate, not the subject of predatory behavior, you need to have infrastructure owned and controlled and run by the farmers themselves through some kind of co-ops. And I think so we've been doing this for quite a while, but I think now this is accelerated because I think the farmers themselves, aside from the previous motivation or incentive, which was profit, now they realize it's their livelihood. It's their livelihood. If they're not able to actually get feed for the animals, or the planting season has started now, where they can get the seed and the fertilizers, they can't survive. They can't survive. So we're seeing this energy, and people are our staff is still locked down by law, but soon enough we'll be able to make the right. When we've got the capital with which to make the investment, or there's plenty of capital around, and the returns are good. So yeah, I think that's going to provide. It's going to catapult this whole building of infrastructure to create a level of independence and autonomy that's required for the system to function, to get away from that concentration you were talking about, right? That once the system, that concentrated system is so optimized that one link of the chain breaks, everything breaks. It's just amazing. Right. Everything just collapses. Yeah.
I mean, I worry in the developing world in particular that there are all kinds of other, again, not direct effects of COVID-19, but secondary effects. So that, the clinic closes, so women can't get birth control,
right,
can't get prenatal checks. They deliver at home, they're more likely to die in childbirth. As you know, I think 1.7 children are out of school worldwide. And they're not only missing school, but they're missing school feeding programs. And that will have an impact on their nutrition. It means they won't get their deworming, which happens typically in school feeding programs. And, if this lasts 2 months, it's probably manageable. If it lasts a long time, then there will be a real impact on nutrition, on healthcare, on maternal mortality, girls' education in particular, probably. And I think it's hard to work out the extent of those ramifications. Vitamin A distribution has been suspended in many countries. Polio eradication campaigns have been suspended, and that will cost lives.
It will cost a lot of lives, and yeah, we worry. We at Heifer worry very much about malnutrition and the impact it has long term on the cognitive abilities and just the functioning of these kids as they grow into adults. So we're advising a lot of the farmers we work with to feed yourself. Make sure that you feed yourself and your families first. Yes, markets are important, but Um, so our focus has been on that. You know, things like hygiene, everything else sounds good here in the Northern Hemisphere, but there's no running water, there's no soap, and you know, the practicalities of it are not quite as obvious as they
Yeah.
seem to us, you know. But
Three,
feeding yourself, yeah,
I think 3 billion
yeah.
people don't have, hand washing facilities at home.
No,
Um,
no. They
and
just, or running waters, you know, half a mile away, or no, not, well, the
yeah,
well is half a mile away. And, you know, we're all a little bit lazy. Are we going to really walk half a mile to wash your hands? By the time you're back, they're dirty again. I don't know. It's,
one of my
uh,
favorite stats is that more people in the world have a cell phone than
yeah.
have hand washing facilities at home.
Oh, absolutely. By far, by far. It's good in the sense that we're able to communicate with the communities we work with and let them know, you know, do try to wash your hands, do try and maintain good hygiene and social distance. And here's the opportunity for markets and to sell. But, you know, in the remote communities where we work, a lot of people just don't keep social distance and they go to markets anyway. They feed each other, right? And so there's a lot of solidarity. And so it's a good sign. So in terms of the global institutions, you know, WHO and the UN and the USAID, et cetera, do you think they're doing enough? Are they focused enough? What are you hearing out there about their efforts?
So, I think that they are deeply concerned. Henrietta Fiore at UNICEF, David Beasley at WFP, Mark Lowcock at OCHA. I mean, they have been jumping up and down and screaming about this crisis. I think that the problem is that the rich world is looking inward and is focused on the crisis at home. And, here in the US, I think there are a lot of Americans who, I just had a COVID-19 kind of aid project and got donations, and people had the option of donating to needy families here in the US or those abroad. And, people did both, but you had the sense that people particularly, they see their own fellow countrymen and women hurting, and they have a focus on those at home. And I think more broadly, WFP, UNICEF, it's not, there's, as you know, something of a skepticism about foreign aid and a lot of America. And I think that we are so inwardly focused that we aren't going to adequately respond. It also comes on top of the fact that I think President Trump is trying to turn WHO into something of a scapegoat, and I think to some degree that probably hurts the UN system, taints the UN system as a whole. And so I fear that worldwide we are going to miss the boat in this hunger pandemic, and that there will be a lot of people who will pay a price, and the result will be some increase in mortality, but maybe more importantly, there'll be an increase in morbidity, and some young children won't get adequate nutrition as their brains are being developed. And I think one of the things we've learned over the last 20 years is that when the brain is developing, especially in the first 1,000 days or so, and there is not adequate nutrition, there is a real loss of cognitive bandwidth that remains for the rest of one's life.
Yeah.
And I worry a lot about that.
Yeah, we worry a lot about that too. And so in the longer term, it looks like in the short term, it's going to be much like perhaps in the United States, pretty chaotic in terms of response, and there may not be enough resources to actually have. But in the longer term, and I'm thinking maybe medium term, 1 year, 2 years, what should we focus on? What should, we have some capacity and capability to actually advocate in the countries in which we operate. What should we, we've been working on development, regular agricultural development work, but is there something else we should be thinking about to actually to create the kind of resilience that's needed for the next, whether it be a pandemic or whether it be global climate change, et cetera. There's going to be a wave of these things, right, affecting us for a while, or for perhaps the rest of my lifetime anyway. So
Well, I mean, I welcome your thoughts. My own take is that the calculus on social distancing is different in poorer countries than it is in rich countries, and that it makes sense in New York, and it may not make sense in Bangladesh, for
Yeah.
example, or in Malawi or wherever it may be. And I think it becomes really important to try to get schools operating again, partly for those school feeding programs. And again, transportation going to, to get seeds to the villages and food to the cities, to get people back in jobs. Bangladesh, BRAC had a study that more than 75% of rickshaw drivers are out of work. And, when rickshaw drivers aren't bringing home money, their kids aren't eating. And I think that we in the rich world need to appreciate that what poor countries need most desperately isn't ventilators. It's not ICU beds. It's efforts to help address these nutritional and educational needs, and that's also something that we know how to do. It's something that is proven. We can save these lives. We can prevent this crisis, but it's got to be on the agenda.
Yeah. No, I think it's fascinating. I think the food crisis is actually hitting us right here in the United States. So maybe there'll be a greater understanding of what that means. That the photographs that the New York Times has published in terms of the lines at food banks and everything else is just astonishing, absolutely astonishing.
Yeah, it's extraordinary. I mean, there was just one study that Brookings did that 1 in 6 American kids isn't getting enough food right now. And that's just it's mind-boggling.
Yeah, it is mind-boggling. No, but I think this focus on creating sustainable, what we call at Heifer permanent systems that can actually withstand some kind of disruption, whether it be climatic or political or military or medical. That's the focus, and I think everybody understands that, and we're all working on that. But
and Pierre, do you see? I mean, and I can see an argument that also is a useful stress test for climate-induced disruptions that are probably going to be increasingly likely over the next 25 years. And this may give us a toolbox to address future climate disruptions. Is that right?
Yes, I think it does. There's all sorts of little. If you think of like a farmer, like right now they need seeds. Why did we not have stores of seeds nearby, as opposed to somewhere in the depot in the capital city or the major city nearby? We're thinking in the developing world, or the thinking has been, let's think like an industrial system in the United States or in Europe. Well, that just is not appropriate.
Right.
So we're going to have to adapt. And that means, we go back to E.F. Shoemaker, small is beautiful, kind of that approach. How do you make it effective, efficient, but small? And not depend on, and not sort of, not think about large systems as being the solution to everything that we've got. It isn't. I think with climate change, it's the same thing, because you've got floods in one area, and literally maybe 50, 100 miles away, you've got a drought.
Right.
And how do you, it's just,
right.
The response to that is a very complicated, not complicated, but it just needs to create a mosaic of responses that allow for flood tomorrow, drought next month. How do you do that? And I think we can do that. I think it can be done. It takes, what it takes? It takes working capital. All this stuff takes money, for these systems to exist and hold storage. So it takes capital to build the storage equipment, and maybe you need refrigeration, and then you need working capital for somebody to hold the seeds and the produce. And so I think capital is not in any predatory Wall Street way, but just capital, just the availability of resources. And that's a huge deal, I think, because there's plenty of capital in the world, that we know. There's perhaps not quite as much ODA, overseas development aid. Yeah. So
one of the you mentioned that working capital, and one of the issues that I've been kind of fascinated in the developing world is just the difficulty of savings. That families often, they get their income once or twice a year at the end of a harvest, and they don't have a bank account. It's very difficult often to get a bank account. They may not have IDs, and so then husbanding this large sum of money over the next 6 months, or in some cases over the next year, when they're surrounded by needs and temptations, is really difficult.
Very difficult. Very difficult. Yeah. Yeah, and I think we Americans don't know how to manage that very well either.
Absolutely. No, absolutely. But at least we have banks. In West Africa, they have these susu like money
groups.
Yeah, and they will take deposits. So you can deposit your money with them, but they charge 70% annual interest on your deposits. And so, micro savings becomes obviously a challenge in that context if you have to pay to deposit your money and
pay for the service. Yeah. The other part of cash flows for a lot of these countries is remittances.
Right.
And
absolutely.
With a huge impact that we're having on employment here, remittances are dropping from, I think the World Bank was estimating from $550 billion a year down to well under 400, or well under 500, 420, 430. At the margin, that's an enormous impact.
Enormous. No, you're absolutely right. That is going to be devastating to some of these countries that are very dependent on remittances.
Haiti is a good example. I think
absolutely.
Something like 35% of their gross national product is actually remittances. And if that dries up, they will go hungry. They will go hungry in Haiti because of that. Well, this could be this. Our 20 minutes are up. That was very quick.
We solved many of the world's problems together.
We did. I mean, immediately and permanently. But anyway, I want to thank you for this 20 minutes of your time. I really appreciate it, and thank you so much for the columns you write. You're a real lighthouse for us, and we really appreciate it.
Thank you for what you and your colleagues at Heifer do. If I'm in the lighting business, but I'm shining that light on people who are actually doing things out in the area. That's you and all your colleagues.
Yeah. So good. Well, thank you for that. And want to let the audience know that Thursday we have in fact, one of the subjects that came up today, communication with around blockchain and exactly how that can help in the deployment of capital to the people that need it in a way that's fair and doesn't utilize 70% interest rates. So check in. I think you're gonna find that interesting in terms of the conversation about the new technology and how it can help the most actually advanced technology and how it can help some of the poorest people in the world. So that'd be interesting. But Nick, thank you again for your time. And I'll keep reading, of course, your column.
And I'll keep watching and admiring your work.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Take care.
See ya. Bye-bye. See ya.